So tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of the gap that has emerged in American life. And it's a gap that the Prager University team is really taking a large part in fighting against. It is a gap between what I've called the lions and what are called the scavengers. American life, and I think international life, is breaking down into two groups of people. And everybody has their own version of the two groups of people, right? They're the people who like Moroccan food and the people who don't, and all the rest of it. You're a fool if you don't like Moroccan food, by the way. My wife is Moroccan. It's incredible. Anyway, the breakdown that I have been focusing on recently is a battle between lions and scavengers. Lions are people who actually want to achieve in the world, who believe in duty, who believe in community, who believe that if they work hard, they will get ahead, and they believe in a system that actually fosters that. And scavengers are people who want to tear everything down in the name of envy, in the name of jealousy, in the name of rage. And you see this domestically, and you see this internationally. Internationally, an excellent example of this would be Israel versus Hamas. Israel wishes to build a thriving, wealthy, tolerant, diverse society, and its enemies wish to tear all of those things down in the name of envy and jealousy. It doesn't matter what gets built next. The only thing that matters is the murder, the rape, the looting, and the destruction. That's all that matters. And the allies of those people in the West tend to be quite similar people. In the West, the battle between the lions and the scavengers is most obvious on college campuses, where you see people who literally live off the fat of the land and yet somehow disdain and despise the cultures that are allowing them to live the very lives that they live. And so I've been trying to break down in my own mind what it means to be a lion versus to be a scavenger, what this actually means. And I think that lions have three particular principles that are quite important. And these are things that I think Prager U does an amazing job of inculcating. And these are principles that I hold dear in my life, again, thanks to people like Dennis Prager, who are such formative thinkers for, I think, all of us. First, that there is, in fact, a master plan and a logos behind the universe, that the universe makes some semblance of sense. Dennis is very big on this, obviously, in all of his writings, the idea that there actually is a blueprint for the universe and the world makes some sort of sense, and you can actually understand it to some extent. Not to every extent, you're not God, only God can understand the world completely. Terrible things happen to good people, but in general, if you act well in the world, you will do better. I would say that the Bible is actually the first anti-conspiracy theory. If you take a look at pagan ideologies basically suggested that you're living in a world that's controlled by a series of quarreling gods who live above you. They're fighting with each other just like you would fight with your friends or your family, and then you're basically the byproduct of what's going on upstairs. And no one cares about you. What happens to you is essentially chance or whim. It's very enervating. The biblical idea is that there is, in fact, a blueprint for the world, a relatively understandable blueprint for the world. Right? In the book of Deuteronomy, it says that it is not in heaven. It's given to you on earth so you can understand it. You can actually grasp it. And that's really, really important, because what that really means, and the reason I say it's an anti-conspiracy theory, is that if you fail, it's probably your fault. This is something the Bible is very big on, is that if you fail in life, there's like a 98% shot that it's your fault in some way. You could have done better. This is why in Judaism, when the temple is destroyed, the answer isn't, oh my God, why is God being so terrible to us? The answer is, well, it was probably sinat chinam, right? It was probably that you had baseless hatred for one another. You hated one another, right? This is the story of the prophets. The same story, by the way, is true in Christianity as well. These are biblical principles that are true whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, is that if you have something that went wrong in your life, it's not because God is being unjust to you. It's because you were unjust to God. You did something you probably shouldn't have done, and you need to change your life. And even if you can't fully understand why God's doing what he's doing to you, you can still change your life in ways that make your life better, because there is, in fact, a logic to the universe. That's principle number one for lions. Principle number two is that you are made in the image of God with the ability to choose. You are not just a product of your environment. You're not just a materialist product of your economics. You're not just a meatball wandering through space with no will of its own, a la Spinoza. You actually are made in the image of God with the ability to navigate the world and make meaningful choice in that world. Free will is the nature of the lion. Faced with a world that is difficult to understand and difficult to navigate, we grasp our power to choose, and then we revel in that power to choose. It's important to us. It's why freedom is important, because we want that power to choose. And the power to choose is important because you're supposed to choose rightly. It's not just that you're supposed to act rightly, you're supposed to choose to act rightly. That is the purpose of life, is to choose to act rightly. And then finally, this is all connected to the third piece, which is that you actually do have true and meaningful moral duties in the world. Right? That logos of the universe and your power to choose are all wrapped up in the fact that there are things you are supposed to do in life. And these are things that are really important. They're things like create and innovate. Right? To be an innovator, to create new things. There are things like become a father, become a mother, become a husband, become a wife. These are roles that you are supposed to fulfill. And you actually have a duty to fulfill those roles. It gives you purpose when you wake up every morning. The thing about being a lion means you don't have to be Elon Musk or anyone else who's extraordinarily financially successful in order to be a lion. The guy who just gets up in the morning and goes to work on behalf of his family is a lion. The mother who gets up and builds community is a lion. These are people who have meaningful moral duties in the world and use their power of choice to pursue those moral duties, understanding that there is a God above that requires you to do these things. Right? This is the philosophy of the lion. And then there are the scavengers. The scavengers are creatures of what Kierkegaard called ressentiment. They're envious. They look at the world and they feel their own failures are the result of someone else somehow screwing them. It's, again, back to pagan ideology. It's this idea that if I fail, it is not my fault, it is the system's fault, it is someone else's fault. Typically, it's the more successful people's fault and the system that they design. And you hear this kind of nonsense, by the way, unfortunately, across the political aisle. This is not relegated to one side of the... I wish it were. I think it is largely located on the left. I think there is a growing segment of the right that believes some of these things, that essentially believes that if something is going wrong, it's because there's a cadre of elites who are screwing you. Now, there may very well be situations in which there's a cadre of elites who are screwing you, but you actually have to have evidence to that effect before you start claiming that you don't have to do your duty on a day-to-day level. And I think that politicians make an awfully good living off of telling people that if you just give them an enormous amount of power, then they will solve the problems at the top level by getting rid of this cadre of elites who are holding you down. The reality is they can't do that. The only person in a free society who can make your life better is you. And any politician who tells you differently is lying to you for political gain and or money or both. Okay, so scavengers believe, they have their own philosophy, there is no master plan to the universe. The world is essentially a purposeless place. We are all wandering through it. Morals and civilizations are basically just guises for power. It's the Michel Foucault argument that basically all institutions are just a facade for power. They're people who are pretending they care about principles, but actively what they want to do is harm you. So that's principle number one, is that there is no logos to the universe. There's no God, there's no reason, none of this matters. Two, your failures are a result, again, of one of these corrupt power systems that has been constructed specifically to screw you. The world is a giant conspiracy, and you are a victim of the conspiracy. And finally, violence is very often a proper response to this great conspiracy against you. You can see how what this breaks down into in very simple terms is exactly the stuff that's taught at university campuses that says that if you're a failure, you are oppressed. If you're a failure, you are a victim. And the more you fail and the worse your life is, the more you are oppressed. And the worse you act, the more violent you are, the more that is evidence of your victimhood and thus your oppression. This is why you see sympathy for Hamas among some of the worst people on earth on American campuses. Right? People have been wondering for a very long time, why Queers for Palestine, right? This was obviously the big joke during the last year and a half, was you would see campus groups called Queers for Palestine. And as people would say, that's like chickens for KFC. Right? It's ridiculous on its face. But the reason for that is because when you have a group of people who consider themselves particularly marginalized and they hate the system in which they live because they feel that it is conspiring against them, they are willing to side with literally anyone who also wishes to tear down that system. The coalition of the oppressed is a very real thing, and it exists at college campuses. It's why you will see people with absolutely disparate interests who have nothing in common with one another march against, quote unquote, the system. You see this all the time. And it breaks down, the scavengers break down into, I think, 3 categories. And again, you're seeing all 3 of these categories grow. This is the danger. I think the Lions are winning right now. I think that the last election cycle is proof that there is a backlash to the scavenger philosophy. But the scavengers never go, and the reason the scavengers never go away is because in every single human being's heart, there is a battle between a lion and a scavenger. In every single person's heart. It's not a biological thing that some people are lions and some people are scavengers. In Hebrew, we would call it the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. There are impulses that are battling within you. One that says that you should take responsibility for your life, and one that says that everyone else is responsible for your life. One that says that your failures are your fault, you should take control of your life, do the responsible thing, as my friend Jordan Peterson would say, get up and make your bed. And then there's the side of you that says, actually, my failures are everybody else's responsibility, and the system that made me is deeply flawed and to blame. Because of that, scavengers will never go away. It's just a reality of life. And they break down into a couple of different categories that you see throughout American society and throughout the West at this point. Category 1 are people who I would term the looters. People who on an economic level believe that they are entitled to the wealth of others. The reality is that lions understand property rights inherently because what you make, you own. The sort of stuff that you earn, you own. And you do it for yourself, and you do it for your family, and you do it for your community, and you do it for your pride. That's why you do it. What looters say is, actually, everything you earn, you stole from me, even if that's completely untrue. Completely untrue. Right? Property rights are bad because they're a construction by a perverse elite to take property away from you. Every single person on planet Earth was poor by today's standards in 1800. Every single human. I'm talking about like the Queen of England. If you took the Queen of England's lifestyle in 1800, it would be worse than a middle-class American lifestyle in 2025. That is only because of equal protection of the law and property rights. That is the reason for it. She didn't have any good stuff. Okay, you wouldn't want to be the Queen of England. You didn't have a toilet. Okay, it was not great. Everyone smelled. The first thing you would notice, by the way, if you got off a plane and you landed in like 1750, is everyone would smell like because no one had indoor plumbing, because no one had a toilet, because this was the thing, right? All human innovation is tied to property rights. It's tied to human freedom. It's tied to recognition of that. It's tied to the ethos of the lion. There is no zero-sum game when it comes to economics. There is only creativity. And people who claim that creativity and innovation simply are sort of a natural state of the world are ignoring literally all of human history, all of it. The richest person probably in human history was a guy named Mansa Musa. He was actually an African warlord in the 14th century. And he apparently owned so much gold that when he would locate himself in a town in Africa, when he'd travel up to do Hajj, and he would drop all the gold, he would completely debase the local currency, completely. He had that much gold. And guess what? He died in like his mid-50s, and it took him 2 months to go from like Morocco to Mecca, a flight that now would take like 3 hours. Again, your life sucked until now. Okay, we should all be very grateful for the fact that we don't live in a non-free society that does not respect property rights. But scavengers don't respect property rights because they see rich people and they see people who are less rich and they think that the rich guy stole from the poor guy, which is absolute nonsense. It's absolutely ridiculous. The poor person doesn't have anything to steal for the rich guy. That's just the reality. And the poor guy now lives better than the rich guy did a century and a half ago by every available measurement. People should stop worrying so much about income inequality and start worrying about how all the boats rise. Okay. Then there are the lechers. These are people who believe that the institutions that are really keeping you down are not economic institutions, they're cultural institutions like the church. The church is making you feel excluded. It's making you feel bad about yourself. It's making you feel bad about your feelings. And all that has to be torn away so we can live our truest, freest lives as the gender of our choice. Right? This really is the root of the gender movement that we are seeing right now, is a belief that all the major institutions have sort of indoctrinated human beings in things like there is a man and there is a woman and they are not the same thing. And that if only we got rid of those terrible institutions like the family, like the church, suddenly human freedom would flourish. Your own failures and your own happiness in life are due to the fact that there are these communal standards that suggest that you should become a father or a mother. And by the way, we as a society should not be indifferent to whether people get married and have children. We should not. It is an active good to get married and have children. We should not be, that doesn't mean it's for everybody. It doesn't mean everyone has to do it or we need to force it. But to pretend as a society you can be apathetic about this question is deeply ridiculous on every possible level. People should get married and they should have kids. Okay, so, but the lechers don't believe that. And again, I think all of these, as I'll explain in a moment, actually exist on both left and right. It's a big problem. They are predominantly on the left, but there's a growing element on the right too that has embraced the sort of post-virtue society, the post-church society. The name Andrew Tate comes to mind on the right. People who actively preach the idea that virtue is bad, that marriage is wrong, that bringing up your own kids with your wife is somehow a failing of you to be a man, when precisely the opposite is true. I can't think of anything less manly than knocking up a woman and leaving. That is the least manly thing that you can do. And then there's the third group, the barbarians. And these are the people who you are seeing who basically make the Frantz Fanon case that no one on earth has any agency except Westerners. Everybody on else is just reacting to the Westerners. And this is Edward Said and his Department of Middle Eastern Studies over at Columbia University. The argument of Orientalism, which is one of the most influential books in this particular area, the argument essentially is that the reason that we think in the West that there is cultural inferiority in radical Islam is because we are mean to the people who are radically Muslim, and we have set up a weird binary in our own minds, and this has actually cast them into the outer darkness when really everybody is sort of the same. And in the end, it's really us just being bad and colonialist, and it's colonialism that causes people to be bad. Before that, no one was ever bad. And in order to cure all of this, you have to take everybody in the world into the heart of your civilization and allow them to teach your children that your civilization is really bad and deserves to be destroyed. Frantz Fanon was a very famous exponent of this particular point of view. He wrote a very famous book called The Wretched of the Earth, in which he argued precisely this. He was talking about French occupation of Algeria, and he basically said that all flaws that exist in native populations in Algeria are the French are to blame. And then he says that the only way to fix that is through violent decolonization. And then in the introduction to that book, Jean-Paul Sartre, a truly scummy human being, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote an introduction to that book in which he made the case that essentially the West needed to destroy itself in penance for all of this. These people now occupy almost every head of every Middle Eastern studies department in the United States. This is the argument that's being made to your kids every single day. The looters, the lecherous, and the barbarians are making these arguments to your kids in college. They're making these arguments to your kid actually earlier in high school in sort of a watered-down form. The scavengers have taken over all of these systems and destroyed them from within. The reason you're hearing all the caterwauling now about Prager University, about the Trump administration, about the moves that are being made in education in places like Florida is because they understand that the lions are coming for them now. Because it turns out that Americans and people of the West who don't like this stuff are tired of it and they're done. The lions are coming back right now. But, and this is the big but, it can all be reversed. Right now we feel the momentum, we feel really good about ourselves. And what I keep hearing from people these days, and you hear a lot of this sort of political analysis, is, well, now we're never gonna lose again. I mean, can you see the map? Look at the map. Everybody's moving south, people aren't moving north anymore. All the blue states are losing population, all the red states are gaining population. President Trump won. There are a bunch of good young Republicans, including the vice president, the secretary of defense, there are a bunch of good possible candidates who are coming up in the Republican Party. The Democrats have nobody. They're relegated to Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris. And I mean, all of that is true. All of that is true. However, I am old enough to remember when Republicans said the same thing after the 2004 election, when George W. Bush won re-elect, and he also broadened his majorities in both the House and the Senate, and there was a lot of talk about how Republicans were never going to lose again. And within 2 years, they'd lost the House, and within 4, they'd lost the White House. And I'm old enough to remember when Democrats said this in 2013, after Barack Obama won re-elect and gained seats in both chambers of Congress. And the argument that was made then was Democrats will never lose again. You all remember this argument. This argument was made. This is why it was such a shock to their system when President Trump became president in 2016. They literally thought it was not possible, right? Y'all remember the New York Times needle at 99%. It was not a possibility. The reality is things change incredibly quickly in politics, but there's one thing that does not change particularly quickly in politics, and that is the direction of tides that are underneath the boat. The boat at the top of politics, who's the president of the United States, who wins the latest election, that can change. The status of the boat can change pretty quickly. It can take on water, it can rise in the water, but the broader tides of culture, those are the things that need to be pushed. And this is where Dennis and Prager U are really forward thinking, and that is, it takes generations to instill values. It takes one generation for the scavengers to destroy values, but it takes generations to instill values. And for a couple of generations, the lions have been on the run. And then Prager U began 13 years ago, and my company, Daily Wire, launched about 10 years ago, and the alternative media began, and the right in this country really started to bear its fangs. And you're starting to see this uptick everywhere. I'm hoping that it happens to our northern neighbors as well. I think it's happening in Europe. You're starting to see the lions begin to tire of the predations of the scavengers. They're tired of it. We don't want to hear anymore about how our civilization is responsible for all the ills of the world, when the actual reality is that Western civilization is responsible for virtually every good that has ever been provided on this earth. We don't want to hear anymore about people who refuse to work or refuse to acknowledge their lack of skill in the market, how those people deserve to take money away from people who actually are innovating, and how the innovators are really the bad. That's boring, and it's stupid, and it's annoying, and it's wrong. We're tired of it. And we're tired of hearing about how our churches and our synagogues are places of indoctrination into cruelty and malice, and this is why your child must be removed from you by a public school teacher at the age of 7 and then told that they are a member of the opposite gender. We are all tired of this nonsense. We're tired of it. The tides are changing, but the tides can change back. The tides need to continue to change. And this is where, again, your donations tonight, my donations, frankly, to Prager U tonight, come in so handy. It makes an enormous difference. Prager U is reaching literally millions of people on a daily basis. Prager U is doing an enormous amount of work that simply was not done until the advent of the modern internet, and they're doing it in creative and fascinating and fun ways. They're giving resources to parents who want to know, and they're reaching people whose parents actually did not teach them the values that they needed to know. They understand some things that I think conservatives have failed to understand: the power of media, the power of visual, the power of time. It's easy to say, well, you can't sum up those issues in 5 minutes or less. Let's be real about this. Most people spend 5 minutes or less on key issues in their lives, particularly politically speaking. That's just the reality. I can tell you that that's the case because I have this podcast that people listen to, and I can actually see minute by minute how many people are listening. And you can see the longer it goes, the more people drop off. That's just the nature of, half of you are asleep already. I get it. Okay, but Prager U also gets it. Prager U understands that in 5-minute increments, you can actually change somebody's life. And so I want to thank you on a personal level for what you're doing for Prager University. I want to thank Prager U and all the hard work that all of you at Prager U are doing on behalf of changing the country. The tides are shifting. The battle isn't won because the battle can never fully be won. But the battle is moving in our direction, but we have to keep the momentum going. We cannot let our foot off the pedal for one single solitary moment. Now, I think that in the end, I said that for the lion, the first principle is that there's a logic to the universe. And again, it's very difficult to see that logic from time to time. Alan Nestor and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. It can be very difficult to see God's logic. But in the foundation of Prager U, in the work that Prager U is doing in the world, in the work that I think so many of us on the conservative side of the aisle, the biblical values side of the aisle, the free market side of the aisle, the people who believe in traditional American values side of the aisle, in the work that we are all doing, everybody in this room and all your kids, in the work that you're doing, you are doing the work that God put you here on earth to do. So let's all keep doing that work together, and with God's help, we will in fact win. Thank you so much.